Start recording again. Okay, so I often use the shape tool when I'm trying to make shadows that have fairly geometric forms, often on edges or ledges of things. And yeah, so I think that's where the strength of the way I use my shape tool kind of comes from. Edges and ledges and kind of geometric shapes. We've already kind of talked, and so I could use this technique on like the different faces of this structure, but we've already kind of tackled one way of doing that with kind of decreasing the brightness of an image. So I'm going to select this roof edge here, and I just wanted to make sure that the new layer that I created is below it. And I don't think this layer actually matters, but I'm going to keep it there just as like kind of like a bookmark of some sort. And I'm just going to press U, which is going to open up the rectangle tool for me. So as you can see, I kind of already have a darkish purple color that I like to use for a shadow. Just the smallest amount of color added in there. But given that this is sort of a cloudy day, we could probably expect a little less tone in the shadows of our elements in the landscape here. So I'm going to create my shadow, and I'm going to move it up just a little bit. Maybe change the scale a little bit. And so we have this kind of shape here. So if we look on the layers property by the rectangle, this little icon here means shape. I'm going to do this just roof shadow. So what I'll do is I'll show you kind of what happens. So what I like to do is I like to we're going to kind of have the shadow going from above the structure down onto it. And I like to give a Gaussian blur. If we don't adjust or convert our shape before this, it'll give us a prompt if we want to create a smart object or rasterize our shape. Always go for the smart object because we want that non-destructive editing, although it's not as important for this. And Gaussian blur is kind of I think it's my favorite and my go-to when it comes to any sort of blur in almost any software. And I can't fully explain what it does, but it does what it does very beautifully. And what I'll do is I'm just going to start to give it kind of a feathered edge. Maybe something like this. It's okay. And I'm going to bring, the roof shadow down even further. There we go. And then finally, I'll just lower that opacity quite a bit. Sometimes even just adding a little bit of that multiply tool just to kind of remove a little bit more of that tone and kind of help accentuate the darker element, or like kind of darker colors underneath the shadow. And so that's just like a quick kind of messy way that I like to make those just really geometric shadows. The Gaussian blur I also used for the foreground here. These were all different flowers that came in focus, but I'll also use it to create a sense of depth. So I have a little bit of a blur on the osprey and the geese. So I use the blur for pretty much everything. So that is one way that I'll often make shadows when they're kind of being just a slight cast. We can do that again by, let's see. We just use that pen tool. And this one's not as much of a, we don't really need to use a blur on it. And by doing that, we can kind of see edge of roof, start to create just some like definition and provide some form to the elements. Let's see, I just think I put that. Perfect. Very subtle, but eventually it'll start helping just get that that look. So that's how I use shapes. There's a million different ways to do things in Photoshop, but that's often how I use them for that way. So when casting shadows, I've often caught folks. Let's see if I can do this as using the shadow, the drop shadow tool. Let's see if this works on a mask. So I used to use this too, and it can work in some very special circumstances. But after kind of talking about shadows, maybe you can start to see why it's not really the tool we want to use when we're trying to create a rendering. That shadow of my friend Viknesh is not being applied to the rendering itself, to the landscape or the ground. It's being applied to the layer behind him. And so this might give like a paper, like cut out collagey aesthetic, but we're going for a rendering. We're not going for this two-dimensional look. So what I would do instead is what I'll do instead is I like to Control J and make sure that we convert to a smart object. This is going to, this will kind of merge the mask down onto our image. And for this example, that's okay. And what we can do is kind of explore. There is no great place on this original photo to kind of identify where a shadow may be cast. So we might have to do some rough guessing, and I might kind of exaggerate the cast of the shadow just so you can all kind of get an idea of what I'm kind of doing when I'm making the shadow. So from what we've seen in that presentation, shadows come from the base of the object and get cast along a surface. So what I like to do when I need to make a cast shadow is I like to transform. I like to copy and paste my entourage or object and distort it a bit. And I like to make sure that the feet are lining up or pretty close to. If I need to go back in and touch things up a little bit, I can do that, kind of cheat the shadow a little. But this is a great way to just create a little bit of a cast shadow. We'll bring this in just a little bit more. Okay. So let's see. We have our copy of Vignesh here. And always be careful about breaking those adjustment layers or where they're located. So I noticed that let's see if I can undo that. I noticed my photo got lighter, and that's because this adjustment layer got disconnected from Vignesh. So I had to bring that back to him and connect it to him. So we have this copy. What I like to do is go to blending options. Oh, I can, slow that down just a little bit. Right click on the layer, go to blending options here on color overlay. Click on color overlay. We can start to find that dark kind of purpley color. Maybe yeah. And that'll get applied to Vignesh's shadow. And then, let's see, from there, you can start to decrease that shadow. It's not very apparent, but it is there. Maybe make it a multiply. And from there, I might even actually create a little bit of a mask. Go into my brushes. And then, see, change opacity a little bit. And just start to get it to fade a little bit. One pro strategy is, sorry about that. Oh my gosh. Okay. So if you zoom in on his shadow, zooming in a little bit more than maybe we should, but this is going to just show what we're working on. So in our blending options, let's say we like that shadow, but we know how shadows kind of work in the textures of the grass, and maybe those white flowers may not actually be a significant part of that shadow. We can start to create that illusion by playing around with blend if. So we can say blend if gray, and we want to work on the underlying layers. So right now, Vignesh's shadow is all one color, which means that we can adjust this. There will be a threshold where suddenly his shadow should disappear. And it doesn't, so I don't know what I'm doing with there, but this is hit for his current layer, and then the underlying layers for the layers below it. And we can start to like remove maybe some of the brighter parts of the image below. So his shadow's kind of not just being laid across the grass. This works better in certain situations than others. So I might do that. And then if that's like a little too messy for me, I can always just filter, blur. Oops. Oh, it's just taking a second. Filter. Just blur it a little bit. We can always go back with the feather tool, or sorry, the brush tool, and feather it out a little bit. And that's like a nice way of creating a cast shadow. I can increase that just a little bit. And so obviously, depending on the sunlight, you might have a more intense cast shadow. It may be elongated or not. And I think I always try to go for more of the softer touch when you're working with shadows and kind of changing light and stuff like that. And so I'm not making these shadows particularly to be hyper realistic right now. I'm kind of just showing them as examples for you. The last technique that we'll go through is the dodge and burn. And so the dodge and burn tools are accessible by pressing O, but you can see here that the shapes that that person was talking about. So we have our little wand with the tape, and then we have the burn tool, which is like the shielded hand. And we can kind of think about maybe what do we want to put shadows on? I'd be curious to try and adjust the shadows of the osprey maybe. So I've got my osprey here, and I haven't made any formal edits, so I haven't changed it to a smart object, although I probably should have just because I did change the scale. And I'm going to select that image and let's see. So here's our little osprey. The brushes work the same. So if we right click, we can start to see how we could adjust things a little bit. And as we go over the osprey, you can see that it's starting to get dark. So I think we're exposing that osprey to more and more light, and it's getting kind of intense. My computer's lagging a little bit. And so this is a good tool for when you have your light source coming from a different direction, and you just want to suggest the what direction it's coming from or change it. So we use that burn or that dodge tool. We can start to like lighten up the shadows, maybe make it more of a look of like a ambient lighting. However, there's one really big problem with the kind of editing I'm doing. Does anyone have any suggestions of what that might be?
Destructive?
Yes. And so unfortunately, Photoshop hasn't made dodge and burn tool something that is kind of something you can apply to a smart object. So this is destructive editing. We're permanently altering the source image of this osprey. So there's one other trick that we can use to start doing a dodge and burn, which is kind of a workaround because, again, Photoshop doesn't really have a way to dodge and burn on a smart object. So what we can do is go to layer, new layer fill, solid color. And oops, 1 second. Layer, new layer fill, solid color. And we'll just call this white. We want it to be an overlay. So this mode means opacity mode. So you can see, and then it'll have us kind of select what color we want, and we want kind of straight white. And so what we've done here is we've placed that white over the entire image, essentially dodging the entire image. And so what we can do is select that mask that we just made, and down at the bottom of its properties, select invert, which now means the mask that we're making has been inverted. So instead of having like the dodge all over the picture and us kind of trying to hide it, we're actually exposing that dodge. And then what we can do is very similar to what we've been doing with masks in the past, and just start to draw in that, oops, yeah, sorry. Okay. Press X, so I'm working with white. Oh, and I'm working on, there we go. And just like, you can start to create that dodge effect on the Osprey. And then, so instead of calling this white, maybe we can call this dodge. And we could bring this down to the Osprey layer, maybe make a group so we're just editing that Osprey, but we're only doing the dodge. So if we want to do that burn layer, new fill layer, solid color, overlay. So we're doing the overlay, but for burning, we're gonna bring it all the way down to be true black. And then again, select that mask, invert it, B for brush, and you can go in and start burning wherever you want. And so another example is, if you're trying to like fight, I guess, or trying to wrestle with some really harsh shadows that you don't really necessarily want, you can use the dodge and burn tool to start to kind of help erase the existing shadows. So I might start very subtly. My computer's starting to lag significantly, but you can even see, like, with just a couple of these clicks, we're starting to kind of relieve the shadows from our entourage. And by doing this enough, we can start to like reverse all the shadows. So obviously this isn't something you want to do all the time, but if you have a shadow that's really kind of ruining the overall look, you can start to use the dodge and burn for editing those shadows. So there's just a few ways of creating shadows And hopefully they can help with your renderings that you're all currently working on.